Now that we know how to properly talk about chemical reactions, talk about the equations, read the equations, switching them back and forth from equations to descriptions, descriptions to equations, now that we can start thinking about it as a whole, the next step is balancing equations. So remember in the last lesson, we said that we had the law of conservation of mass. So what you start with and what you end with is the same as far as mass goes and as far as the number of atoms go, right? Now, those atoms are changing their partners to create different chemicals, right? But there's still the same number of atoms in the beginning as there is in the end. We can't magically lose atoms or magically create new atoms. We only have to work with what we have. So that means our next goal is going to be balancing equations. So let's look at what this looks like. Okay, so I'm going to start by describing the steps to you. I'm going to then give you some helpful hints, and then we're going to do an example. And then you'll have some independent practice. So how do we balance an equation? The first step you want to do is write the unbalanced equation. Okay, so write out the chemical formulas of everybody involved. Sometimes I'm just going to give you an unbalanced equation and ask you to balance it. Sometimes I'm going to give you a description of a chemical reaction and you're going to have to write the unbalanced equation. Okay? Next, you want to count up the atoms on each side of the equation, so each side of the arrow. Okay, and say, okay, how many's on this side right now and how many's on this side right now? Then we're going to add coefficients to make the numbers equal. Okay, remember the coefficients are the big number that comes in front of the chemical formula. You cannot change the subscripts. Okay, let me repeat that. You cannot change the subscripts because remember the subscripts gives you the identity of the substance. If you change the subscript, you are changing the chemical. So you cannot change the subscripts, but you can change the coefficient because remember the coefficient tells you how many of that substance you have. So coefficients can be changed because you can add in more or less. Okay? Now, when a atom has both a coefficient and a subscript, you have to multiply those two together to get your total number of atoms. Sometimes when you're done balancing and everything's equal on both sides, your coefficients might need to be reduced to the lowest possible ratio. So for example, if your coefficients are 2, 2, and 4, all of those numbers are divisible by 2, so we can reduce it by dividing each one by 2 and turning our coefficients into 1, 1, and 2. Okay, so just reducing if necessary. Sometimes you won't need to do that. That just happens sometimes, depending on your process. And then last step is always to double check. Always double check. That's what I love about balancing equations is you never need to turn in an incorrect answer. You never need to get one wrong because you just double check to see if both sides are equal. And if both sides are equal, you're done. If they're not equal, then whoops, we made a mistake. So that's why I like balancing equations. I think it's fun because you can always find out if you're right or not by checking. Okay, so those are your big steps. Next, here's a couple of helpful tips that I have found work really well as you go. First, balance one element at a time. I've seen that a lot of students, they try to think about 2 or 3 elements at the same time and like put in multiple coefficients at the same time. And that does work for some people. Some people do have the ability to see all those different atoms in play in their mind at the same time. But especially when you're first starting out, this is something brand new. You got to reduce it down and put your focus on one thing at a time. That'll make it easier. Focus in on one element. So pick one and go, okay, I'm going to balance this one. Okay. Another helpful hint is anytime you write a coefficient in, update all of the atoms that coefficient affects. Okay, and I'm going to show you an example in just a minute. Okay, so for example, if you have NaCl and you're balancing the Na, if you put a 2 in front of the Na, that 2 also goes with the Cl. So go ahead and update the chlorine count too. And like I said, I'm going to show you an example. Okay, if an element appears more than once on one side of the equation, balance it last, okay? And we're going to see that happens really often with oxygen. You'll have oxygen being alone as oxygen, and you'll also see it paired with something else like carbon dioxide. And so you've got the carbon dioxide oxygens, and then you've got the by itself oxygens. So save oxygen, balance it last. Okay, balance it last. And then finally, this one is really helpful. If you have a polyatomic ion, balance it as a single unit. So for example, you would say, I have one SO4, instead of saying, well, I have one S and four O's. Okay, so if you have SO4 on both sides of the arrow, both sides of the equation, just balance it as a whole unit. You have one SO4. That makes it a lot easier than when you have to split it up. Okay, so those are just some helpful hints and tips, some things that I have found make this easier. Okay, let's do an example now. Okay, so aluminum and copper 2 chloride react to form copper and aluminum chloride. All right, so first, step 1, I have to write the unbalanced equation. Okay, so I have aluminum and plus sign copper 2 chloride. I used my naming rules to get that. React, arrow, to form copper plus aluminum chloride. Use my naming rules to get the AlCl3. Okay, now notice I've left a big space in front of each one of my substances. That is so I have room to write in my coefficients. I highly suggest doing this with paper and pencil. So have some paper in front of you, have something to write with, and I do suggest a pencil so you can erase because you will probably need to do a lot of erasing of those coefficients. And that's okay, that's part of the process. So when you get ready to do independent work, grab yourself a pencil with a good eraser and some paper. All right, the next thing I did is I came below the arrow and I wrote every single atom that is involved in the equation. So I have Al on both sides, I have Cu on both sides, and I have Cl on both sides. So I just wrote it out. That way I can keep up and I don't skip anybody. So that's the next thing I like to do. Okay, next we need to count how many of each. So if we look, our balance point is the arrow. So on the left side of the arrow, I look right here, I have one aluminum. Okay, let's go look on this side of the arrow. I have one aluminum. So I'm going to write down how many I have. I have one of each. Okay, next, let's count the coppers on both sides. On this side, I only have one Cu. Okay, on this side, I have one Cu. So I'm going to write down how many I have of each. Next, Cl's. I have 2 on this side because of that subscript. I have 2 Cl's here. Over here I have 3 Cl's. So I'm going to write down I have 2 on this side. I have 3 on this side. All right, now that I have written all of these down, we can see that it's unbalanced. The numbers on this side are not all equal to the ones on this side. Okay, who's my culprit? Chlorine. Chlorine is not balanced. Okay, so we got to balance it. So to do that, we want to find a number that they both have in common. So I have a 2 on this side, I have a 3 on this side. What number do both 2 and 3 have in common? Hopefully you guys are thinking the number 6. They both have the number 6 in common. So I can make both sides have 6. Okay, to do that, if I write a 3 in front of CuCl2 on this side, that means that 3 times 2, I now have 6 chlorines. Okay, but I want to update all of my counts, right? Because that 3 affects more than just that chlorine. It also affects my copper, so I also have 3 coppers now. Okay, so I'm updating my copper count to 3, and I'm updating my chlorine count to 6. Okay, so I now have 6 chlorines on this side, and I've updated everything I've done on this side. Now, let's make that 6 chlorine on the other side. If I put a 2 here, that means 2 times 3 will be 6 chlorines. But that 2 also affects that aluminum. So let's update my aluminum count. So now on this side I have 2 aluminums and I have 6 chlorines. Okay, now my chlorines are balanced. Awesome, so I've done that. But look at what I did. I've unbalanced the other ones, and that's okay. That's how this process works. So we're going to keep moving forwards. So now we have to pick either the aluminum or the copper. We need to balance one of them next. And it doesn't matter which one you do first. It's really personal preference. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say I'm going to balance my aluminum. I have 1 on this side, and now I have 2 on this side. So I need to make this side have 2. What number does 1 and 2 have in common? 2. So if I put a 2 in front of my aluminum here, I now have 2 aluminums. And that number 2 does not affect any other chemical or any other atom. It only affects aluminum. So let's update. Now I have 2 aluminums on this side. Double check. I have 2 aluminums on that side. Aluminum and chlorine is now balanced. Okay, so all that's left is my copper. So I have 3 on this side and I have 1 on this side. What number do 1 and 3 have in common? 3. So I need, this side already has 3. I need to make this side have 3. So I'm going to write a 3 in front of my copper, and then I'm going to update. I now have 3 coppers, and it looks like I'm balanced. All my numbers are equal. But last step is to always double check. So let's go up to my equation. On this side I have 2 aluminums. Over here, 2 aluminums. Okay, check. On this side I have 3 coppers. On this side I have 3 coppers. Check. On this side I have 3 times 2 is 6 chlorines. On this side, I have 2 times 3 is 6 chlorines. Check. All right. Are my numbers reduced as far as they can go? 2, 3, 3, 2. There is not a number that I can divide by that would still give me whole numbers. So it is reduced as far as it can be reduced. So I am done. Okay. Now it's time for you to practice balancing. If you need some help, get into contact with me.